Thank you. My great wish is that a year from now, 5 years from now, you look back on this hour and say, that was the most wasted 45 minutes of my life. I hope none of you ever see a living screwworm, adult or larva. So why are they called screwworms? Okay, use a little imagination here. Screws have threading on them. If you squint just right, the screwworm larva looks like it's a threaded screwworm. I didn't come up with that. I'm just trying to explain why it's called a screwworm. Maggots. I don't know if you've ever stopped and spent a little time looking at maggots. We entomologists do that. They don't have legs. They don't really have heads. They don't have eyes. They don't have ears. They don't have wings. They don't have lots of body parts. They're pretty simple little tubes. That's what we're going to be talking about today. When you think about flies, we're usually concerned about the ones that have wings. They're the ones that get on our cows, they suck their blood. Horn flies, stable flies, face flies, house flies, horse flies, deer flies. All of those are pests of our animals because they have wings and they fly into our properties and they harass our cattle. In this case, we're not concerned about the ones that have wings. We're concerned about the maggots, the larvae. That's the stage that hatches from the egg, that feeds, that grows up, and eventually gets wings and becomes what we look at as a fly. But this is actually a fly, just a baby fly. Screwworms. Screwworms are so different. They don't transmit any disease agents. They eat living flesh. The maggots eat only living flesh. You're not going to find these maggots on a dead dog on the side of the road. These are only found in living animals, and they're found in pretty much any living animal. Birds, mammals, cats, dogs, horses, pigs, chickens, humans, any animal that's out there potentially can be a host for screwworms. Here in Georgia, we have over 2 million white-tailed deer. Every one of those white-tailed deer is potentially a screwworm nursery. They can perpetuate the population, and there's not much we can do about this because the screwworms are growing in an animal that's out in the woods somewhere. We have no control over it. We can't treat them. We can't eliminate the screwworms in them. So this could be a serious problem if screwworms get back into the United States. We do a lot of things that unfortunately entice the screwworm fly to come in and lay her eggs. We do castrations, we do dehorning, we do ear tags. And of course, animals, again, white-tailed deer, when they're in rut, they're fighting, they're damaging each other, they're creating wounds, which then exude an aroma, which is so enticing for the adult female screwworm. She comes in, she lays her eggs. That animal is now infested with screwworms. And this is what they look like. Yes, pretty disgusting. Those are the rear ends of screwworm maggots. They are in there eating living flesh. The egg mass was laid over here. The larvae have hatched, crawled into the wound, and they are making the wound larger and larger and larger, and they will continue that until the animal dies. Same thing over here. You got an ear tag. Creates a wound, very attractive to the screwworm fly. She comes in and lays her eggs. The eggs hatch, the maggots grow in that area. They eat flesh, making the wound larger and larger until the animal dies. And again, they can be in any animal. So you got this dog here. Whoops, sorry. You got this dog. How do I back up there? Here we go. Dog here with them in his eye. So this can have implications for your home life. This goat over here around the navel. Newborns are probably one of the most vulnerable groups. If you've got calves being produced on your facility, and of course you do, they're going to be out there with those navels just putting out aromas that are attracting flies. So if screwworms get into the area, unfortunately the dairies with their nurseries are going to be one of the most concerning areas. Hooves. any kind of injury, again, it only takes a tiny place where a tick has bitten, just a small opening to the skin. That's where the screwworm larva can get in. Back to the white-tailed deer. Again, when they're in rut, they're damaging themselves. Only takes a small opening. The screwworm female comes in, lays her eggs. Those maggots will start feeding on that area. They're simultaneously putting out this fluid, as you can see it dripping down the side of the face there on that buck. That's a very attractive aroma for other adult female screwworms to come in. They keep producing in that same animal until the animal dies. Without human intervention, an animal who has screwworms is going to die. There's nothing they can do about it. They can't lick the screwworms out. There's no way they can get rid of the screwworm larvae. If you're ever on Jeopardy, you might need to know this. The scientific name of the screwworm is Cochleomya hominivora. Homina, if you think about it, you remember your Latin? That means man. Vorax, they voraciously feed, so it's a man-eater. So that's the scientific name. In other words, people have long known that screwworms were attracted to humans as well as other animals. This is the screwworm. Screwworms don't really bite, but they do have these scraping mouth parts here. So there's little hooks there. They get in the wound and they scrape and they scrape and they scrape and they consume that food that way. So they have to have moist, living flesh to consume, and they will consume it. The typical mass of screwworm eggs that's laid, excuse me, is about 300 per egg batch. So you can have large numbers of larvae being produced, and they can certainly eat through an animal. Now, there's nothing particularly distinctive about what a maggot looks like. Most maggots look pretty much the same. They're the same size as other flies out there. The difference is, again, that they feed on living tissue. So they're out there eating the living animal. Now, for a while, the animal may not particularly notice this, but after a while, you can tell the animal gets distressed, upset, and you can appreciate why. If you fold back that tissue, thank you, sir. Fold back that tissue and look at it, you see all these maggots in there just voraciously feeding on that tissue. You see why they put me on before lunch? Yeah. Symptoms. The animal becomes irritated and depressed. They're sick. They're hurting. They lose their appetite. They shake their heads. They have that distinctive smell of decaying flesh. And there are wounds visible maggots visible in the wound. One thing about dairy producers is that you know your animals. You're out there, you spend time with them. You're going to notice these behaviors. And you're certainly going to notice that fragrance when the maggots start producing that exudate that flows down the outside of the animal. But unless you intervene, again, that animal is going to die. Now, why has all of a sudden the screwworm turned up in the news? We eradicated, and I use the imperial we here, the USDA actually eradicated screwworms from the United States 50 years ago. We haven't had to deal with screwworms for 50 years. It was working. And they used a technique called the sterile insect technique, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. None of you are old enough to remember screwworms. Screwworms were here in the Southeast back in the mid-50s. But they were maintained, they were eradicated throughout North America, down to Central America, down to Panama. And the reason there is because Panama is, as you can see, a very skinny country, and they were able to maintain the population there without allowing it to resurge back into North America. There have been screwworms in South America continuously since. In my class, when I first studied about this and heard this, why didn't they go ahead and eradicate them from South America and eradicate them from the earth? Well, if you think about it, historically, South America has not had very stable governments. So the USDA, the federal government of the United States, was partnering with Mexico, with Guatemala, with Costa Rica, with all these Central American countries. We were pouring our tax dollars into these countries to eradicate screwworms. They were collaborating with us. They were cooperative with us. They actually did what they said they would do and eradicated screwworms from their countries. When you get to Colombia and some of the other countries in South America, they had worse problems than screwworms. They had drugs, they had government overthrows, they had dictators. So we were never successful in collaborating with any of the governments in South America. Thus, South America maintained screwworms, and they've been potentially serving as a source of reinfestation ever since. Just to reiterate, the adult female screwworm oviposits in a wound, about 300 eggs per egg-laying event. Those larvae then hatch, burrow down into the wound. By the way, the head is the sharp point there. The blunt end here is actually the rear end. And you see those little dark dots in the rear end? Those are actually the openings to their respiratory systems. Yes, they have their nose in their rear end, but that's how they can breathe, because that area is still above the wound, above the muscle. Then they've got their heads down in the living tissue, so they're feeding at the same time they can breathe. When I tried to do that, I choke, but they've got it down to a science. When the larvae have gotten as large as they're going to get, they crawl out of the wound, fall to the ground, burrow into the soil, and form a pupal case. And within that pupal case, the maggot is going to change into an adult fly. So this thing is going to start looking like this thing, all within this pupal case here, which is underground. Then when the adult has successfully gone through metamorphosis, this is what occurs within the pupal case here, it pops off the end of the pupal case, sticks its head out, crawls up through the dirt, and there's above ground, looks for a mate, starts the life cycle all over again. Males and females get together. The inseminated female then is able to lay viable eggs, but the female loses all interest in sex. She has sex one time, she's got her eggs fertilized, she doesn't need a male anymore. And this is critical to the success of the sterile insect technique, because the female can mate only with someone, some fly that cannot produce viable sperm. So that's the life cycle of the fly, just as a reminder. Again, they can attack any host, so she has to find a warm-blooded host, lay her eggs there, and of course, as you see with this poor cow here, they can lay the eggs actually on mucous membranes and not have to have a wound, go in through the eye, burrow into the brain. That animal's done for. Cattle, huge wound here, screwworm has killed that animal. Sheep, swine, like I said, any vertebrate animal, potentially. And again, without human intervention, the animals will not survive screwworm infestation. So this poor horse, as you can see the wound up here, unless we get the maggots out of that wound and salvage that animal, it's going to die. Now, back to the sterile insect technique. Fortunately, this is a tropical insect, so it doesn't do well in the northern reaches of the United States. So it never settled into the northern part of the country. You won't find it up in Minneapolis and so on, but it does really, really well in the humid heat of the southeast. It was eradicated here in the southeast back in the late 50s. Then it was so successful that they adopted the program and extended it to the southwest, eradicated it there in the 60s. We had gotten screwworm out of the United States. But we've got a long border with Mexico here, so we had to collaborate again with Mexico to eradicate the screwworm from Mexico to keep it from being reintroduced over and over again back into Texas. And we did that successfully. We pushed it back through Mexico through the 70s and 80s, got it down to the rest of Central America here, through Costa Rica, down to Panama. Panama, a little country there, a very skinny country. And they were able to maintain it south of Panama for 50 years successfully. And then in the last couple of years, something happened and the fly was able to resurge back up to Mexico. Now, a little more about the sterile insect technique. This is the facility in Panama where they raise screwworms on purpose with your tax dollars. 100 million screwworm larvae every week for the last 20 years, sorry. This is the facility. They've got this huge warehouse here, enclosed with artificial rearing. I won't go into it, but they've actually developed an artificial medium that they can raise the maggots in so they don't have to use living animals. And this took a lot of scientific innovation, but they actually have something where the larvae they fool the larvae into thinking they're living on a living animal. So you've got this huge facility there, continuing to produce screwworm larvae every week. This is what screwworm larvae look like then, being raised there in that USDA facility. Now, Texas has already voted to establish one of these facilities in Texas so that they will have the sterile insects right there. If the screwworm gets back into Texas, they won't be wasting any time. They can hit the ground running. Except that it's estimated that it's going to take 4 years for the facility to become operable. Call me a cynic, but when's the last time a federal project actually came in on time and on budget? I don't think so. There are a lot of things to complicate this. You've got to get all the building permits. You've got to find a site. Now, Texas has a lot of empty land, admittedly. But this is one of those not in my backyard projects because the facility produces aromas, stenches, really bad smell. So people don't want to live near it. Secondly, you've got to have trained personnel to do the rearing. Like a lot of things in life, there's a lot of science to raising insects, but there's a lot of art too. It's one of those things where you learn by doing. You make a lot of mistakes until you finally get it right. So initially, I anticipate that they'll have to bring people up from the Panama lab to start the lab there in Texas and train people to do it. Unfortunately, of course, these are Panamanians. They're not Native Americans. And so ICE is probably going to arrest them and evict them. So what are we going to do about the personnel in this laboratory, at least initially, until it gets up to speed? So there are a lot of holdouts. Another problem is that we're humans. We make mistakes. Every once in a while, there are escapees from the lab. So more flies. Fortunately, this is not a fly that bites or stings or anything like that. But it's annoying to people to know that there are additional flies being produced. So there are a lot of drawbacks to this. Questions about other states wanting to have their own facilities. We want to be independent, be ready to respond. I don't recommend this. I think we can rely on the USDA to have strategically placed facilities and hopefully enough. And again, I hope we don't need them at all. I don't think it's a good use of our tax dollars to have one of these facilities in every state, in other words. Again, the life cycle of all flies, screwworms the same. The egg hatches into the maggot, also known as the larva. The larva then pupates, forming that pupal case within which it's going to change into an adult fly. Sorry, the adult fly. And this is what they look like. The pupal cases start out being about the same color as the larva. It then hardens and gets darker over time, turning into kind of a reddish color. Then eventually almost black, and that's the pupal case from which the adult fly will emerge. All of this occurs within that facility where they're raising the screwworm flies. We have argued that the screwworm eradication project using the sterile insect technique was one of the most successful in history. Now, the way it's done is pretty bizarre. We talk about sterility. We're talking about sexual sterility or reproductive sterility. We are sterilizing the gonads so that they cannot produce viable sperm. The males are sterilized. It has nothing to do with microbes. It doesn't affect fungi or bacteria, viruses, things like that. We're talking about the gonads, the reproductive organs. We're messing up their genes so that they cannot successfully father offspring, which is what we want to do. So how does this work? Huge numbers of sterile male screwworms are produced. They are then released, generally by air, over the area where there's an infestation of screwworms. That means that any female who's looking for a mate has a vastly greater chance of finding a sterile male than of finding a fertile male, a naturally occurring wild male. So every time a female mates, she's probably going to mate with the male that has been sterilized. They have sex, just like a normal pair would, but she does not get impregnated. She will not have successful eggs that are viable and that will produce maggots. So this is the sterile insect technique. And again, it has worked for 50 years. It worked really well. They were producing tons and tons of males in the laboratory in Panama. Then they were sterilizing them there, releasing them in any area where there were naturally occurring screwworms infestations, and preventing them from successfully reproducing and maintaining their population. So again, millions of sterile male flies. This lab, of course, is producing 100 million flies every week. So the chances are that the wild female screwworm flies are going to mate with these sterile males, and then, as I said, they lose all interest in sex and become refractory to further mating. This is the facility's irradiator. So this is where the pupae get radiated, messes up the chromosomes. These flies are unable to successfully father maggots. So this is the stage that gets put in the irradiator, the pupal stage, so when they come out as adult flies, they're already sterile. Then they're loaded on airplanes. The planes fly over these areas where there are known established populations of screwworms, release the screwworm males there, they fall to the ground, they start looking for females, they mate with the females, but they cannot successfully father larvae. As you have probably seen in the media, newspaper and so on, the screwworm flies have been found through Mexico now. These are locations where in the last couple of years screwworms have been found in Mexico. Much too close to the United States for my comfort. Again, remarkable success, the sterile insect technique, you may get used to hearing that phrase, SIT, against the New World screwworm, one of the great success stories in animal parasitology. And again, for 20 years, over 20 years, the eradication zone was maintained in Panama, successfully using this technique by just vastly outnumbering the number of native flies with these sterile flies. And it worked. This is the way we're going to eradicate screwworms again. This process has worked for over 50 years. This is how we eradicated them from North America to begin with, and it will work again if we can get humans to behave. It's not a problem. These flies, by the way, don't fly long distances. It's not that they're flying from Panama over to or up to Mexico. They're being transported by humans shipping animals. So primarily beef cattle. We ship in a lot of feeder calves coming from Mexico for feed lots here in the United States. Typically, they had to be inspected. Every animal coming across the border had to be inspected for a couple of things, the fever tick and for screwworms. Somewhere along the line, that process broke down, and screwworms were getting into Mexico when they should not have been. Now, I've told you a couple of lies here. I said that we've never had to deal with screwworms since the 1950s. This is not actually true. About 10 years ago, there was an outbreak of screwworms in Key West, Florida, in the Florida Keys. Have you ever been there and seen these little these little miniature white-tailed deer? They're not a different species. They're a different subspecies of the white-tailed deer that we have throughout the Southeast. They're cute. They're tiny, like a good-sized dog. And they treat them like pets there. There's only about 1,000 of them, so they're kind of an endangered subspecies. But people consider them part of the Florida Keys. It's kind of a distinctive feature of the Florida Keys. So these screwworms came in. They started showing up in these key deer. There's one there. And the key deer, of course, were injured. Of course, there's always a scratch. You got a barbed wire fence. You've got a briar, something that scratches the skin. The maggots or the fly finds that, lays their eggs there. The maggots go into the wound, and they infested these deer. So there was reproduction going on, maintaining the population. Wounds like this, where the maggots, again, get in there, they eat, they increase the size of the wound, they produce these fluids that are aromatic and are attractive to other screwworm flies. They come in, perpetuate the infestation. Again, during the rut, the bucks are injuring each other, creating wounds that are attractive to the screwworms. They get in, they eat. The media made a lot out of this. They used a lot of dramatic terminology, a gory condition. They call these zombie deer because, show you, they actually eat through the brain or through the skull into the brain. And an animal without a functional brain is wandering out in traffic. They're stumbling around. They're still alive, but only technically. And these screwworms then were responsible for killing over 100, about 133, I think, endangered key deer out of a population of 1,000. So because these were endangered, this was a big media event as well. Yes, so here you've got a deer. It doesn't show up too well with the light contrast here, but you've got a big hole in the top of the skull here where the maggots have eaten through into the brain, and this animal is not long for this world. Initially, they were taking the dead deer and hauling them to the dump there in the Keys in the back of pickup trucks like this. When the deer dies, or when any animal dies, the screwworm larvae evacuate that animal and start burrowing into the ground, getting ready to pupate. They cannot live in dead animals. These carcasses being hauled all over creation were, of course, dropping maggots everywhere they went, which served to further perpetuate the infestation there. So this is a lesson for us. If we find these maggots, we need to contain them. Of course, being an entomologist, I want them put into a jar of alcohol and maintained for me. That's a good way to kill them, a good way to preserve them, and a good way to keep them from going into the next stage of their development and emerging as adult flies and flying around and producing another infestation. You can get huge numbers of these flies. And by the way, they look like every other blowfly out there. They're kind of a greenish blue. So don't start sending me adult flies. We've got enough lookalikes right here in Georgia, and they're easily mistaken. I don't even ask my students in my class to identify the difference between a screwworm fly and the regular blowflies that we have here in Georgia. They're so similar in appearance. But this potentially can cause a problem because we won't be able to get a rapid identification of these flies if they do show up in North America, back in the United States. So how about control? For 50 years, we have not had to have products for controlling screwworms in the United States. Therefore, there were no products registered for use against screwworms. The EPA never got any requests to register products for screwworms because we didn't need them here in the United States. Since the screwworm has started threatening the United States again, some of the companies have rushed to get products registered for use against screwworm. Unfortunately, there are several problems here that you're not going to like. They are available only by prescription. They have extremely long withdrawal times. For instance, this one shown here, cattle must not be slaughtered for human consumption within 98 days of treatment. This also cannot be used in milk animals, can't be used in calves younger than, I think, 2 months, 2 months of age. Lots of limitations on this product. So not going to solve your problem, obviously. But we'll have new products coming along. So one of my recommendations for preparing for the chance that screwworms may show up in Georgia, develop a strong relationship with your veterinarian. We're going to have to revise the Georgia Pest Management Handbook and include screwworms now for the first time ever. So we'll be listing in there the products that are available for control of screwworms. Again, the New World screwworm, Cochleomya hominivirax, is a blowfly, just like these common blowflies that we find, except that their maggots eat living flesh. Now, Texas, of course, is concerned because they're on the front lines, but back in the 1970s, it was reported that screwworms caused cattle deaths amounting to over $300 million per year, just screwworms now, in Texas. It's been estimated that the annual losses to the Texas livestock industry today, without eradication of screwworms, would be over $2 billion a year. But that's not the end of the story. Most of you probably realize, or maybe not, that in Texas, they have a lot of wildlife, imported wildlife from Africa and Asia, and they have these huge wildlife production facilities with 12-foot high fences and so on, and they're raising exotic creatures that I've never seen, never even heard of from Africa and Asia. And they allow hunters from all over the world to come in and shoot one of these and get a rack that they can put on their wall, and they can brag about killing something whose name I can't even pronounce. Well, that's a huge industry in Texas, apparently. They claim that they make over $9 billion a year in wildlife hunting in Texas, just in Texas. Now, I know we have white-tailed deer and feral swine and so on hunting here in Georgia, and landowners make some money off that, but I don't know if we're in the multi-billion-dollar range yet. But that's something to consider. We're not just losing dairy and beef and sheep and swine and so on. We're losing hunting opportunities as well with the screwworms coming in. And as I alluded earlier, they can infest humans. So if you're not concerned about your cats and dogs and cows and horses and pigs and sheep and chickens and so on, be concerned about your children, because anybody who's outside with a wound is potentially vulnerable to being attacked by screwworms and developing maggots developing in that wound. So this fella here got screwworms in his gums. These are the number of screwworms that they pulled out of that injury there. You probably heard in the news a couple of months back, the CDC confirmed screwworm case in a Maryland traveler. So if you travel to South America, potentially you could bring back yourself screwworms in one of the wounds on your body. So they can infest humans, and these are not bacteria, so antibiotics are completely ineffective against this. You'll need to go to a surgeon or somebody and have them pick the maggots out of your skin. This is a picture from South America where this individual let the screwworm infestation persist for some time. You can see there's some very healthy late instar maggots developing there. I hope we don't let it get to this point, but unfortunately there are people who do live outdoors, homeless people that are vulnerable, especially anybody who's paralyzed or immobilized in some way. Potentially screwworms could infest them. So we're going to have problems that we haven't, again, had to deal with for 50 years. Antibiotics are ineffectual, so that will not be our salvation. The good news, screwworms are not in the US. I hope we can continue to say that through the rest of my life. There is no screwworm preventative. There's nothing you can give your herd right now that will prevent them getting screwworms. However, developing a good relationship with your veterinarian is crucial because they're the ones who will be able to prescribe the medications that will get you through this if we ever see screwworms in Georgia. Again, pesticides are not the solution. They may have a role to play, but they're not going to solve the screwworm problem. The sterile insect technique is the proven method. That's what your tax dollars go to. It has been used successfully for 50 years now. It works, and we're probably going to continue to use that. I hope so. I hope the people making the decisions at the USDA continue to invest in that. All the pictures in this presentation were provided by the USDA APHIS. They have a wonderful website if you like looking at gory, disgusting pictures. And there's my contact information in Hinkle at uga.edu. If you have any reason to contact me and you can't find me, Bryce knows how to get in touch with me, so get in touch with him and ask him about that crazy woman who was talking about worms in people's skin, and he'll know who you're talking about. So I think I have about used up my time. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back. We don't have any screwworms in, No, they're completely different species. Yeah, they're in the same family, but different species. So no, they cannot mate. They can only mate with those of their own species. Cochleomya hominivores, in case you're ever on Jeopardy. Yes. Yes, sir?
I think I know. I would like to say great presentation.
Thank you.
I would have liked to had it later after lunch.
Oh,
well after lunch.
Thank you.
But anyway, what attracts them to the initial site? Is it the blood?
It doesn't even have to be blood. When any wound is opened, apparently there's some volatile that comes out that they can smell that I can't. But flies are very attuned to that because that allows them to find a potential host. And so within moments, apparently, the screwworm can find that wound, come in, lay her eggs, and start the infestation.
And I like to think the best of people and insects. What are these things actually good for?
If in case you didn't hear that, what are these things good for? Excellent question. They help to keep populations of animals down. You know, if we outgrow our ability to live on this earth, something's going to kill us off. And I guess screwworms play a role in that. Looking on the positive side. Yes, ma'am. Not yet. Nope, there's no repellent. If you've ever known a pregnant woman and she's at the end of her pregnancy and she starts feeling labor pains, hubby can say, hold off a minute, I want to finish the game, and then we'll get in the car and go to the hospital. Doesn't work that way. When that baby's coming, that baby's coming. When those eggs have to be laid, they have to be laid. So the female fly is motivated to find a host that she can lay her eggs in. It has to be done when the eggs are ready. None of the repellents work. Not against this fly. No, this is a very different kind of fly. Yeah. Yes?
Did they get hauled past the containment area, or did they break down in the pursuit?
I'm an entomologist, so I haven't gotten into the politics behind this, but apparently it was human error. Yeah, people were not inspecting the animals that were being moved north, and so cattle were actually being hauled from Central America through Mexico. That's when the Secretary of Agriculture closed the border so that we were no longer getting cattle from Mexico because we didn't want to bring in potentially infested cattle. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, the process is still active and still good. It works as long as humans behave themselves and do their job. No, the sterile fly dies just like any other fly. Once it's mated, it does not live more than a week or two. So it does. Yeah. Oh, gotcha. I'm sorry. Yes. So now that we know that there are infestations in North Mexico, yes, flies are being flown from Panama up to Mexico and released, sterile flies released around those areas so that the females that emerge from that infestation are mating with sterile males. Thank you. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question, but yes, that's it. They're continuing to use those sterile flies, and they actually are refurbishing an old plant that was raising screwworms back in the 80s, I guess, for Mexico. So it's going to be closer to the location and producing even more screwworms. So we're going to need more sterile screwworms if we eradicate it now that the population has expanded out of Mexico. Or excuse me, out of Panama into Mexico. Yes. Yes, sir?
Yes. We all have to be vigilant because of the massive losses. It could be, but isn't the only cases out of southern Mexico were inspected animals where they found live larvae that were probably infected in southern Mexico, so the threat is farther away than what the press says, isn't it?
That's my understanding, yes. I don't know if we have established reproduction in North Mexico. I don't believe so, but they're still pounding them hard with those sterile males. They don't want to take any risk at this point.
We have one over here.
Yes, sir?
Hello.
Hey.
I just want to share something with you because I understand what was going on a long time ago on I'm from Venezuela. My family owns a beef operation back home for many years. And I remember when I was little, I used to go out with the cowboys, and they see the wound from the screwworm, and they used to take dry manure and pack the wound. Now I understand what they were doing. They were suffocating the
maggots?
because their butts is where they breathe. Now that makes all sense. I never knew why they were doing that.
Your trivia for the day.
Yeah. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yes. All right, I think a lot of you, sorry? Okay.
Got one more. How close was the cow that supposedly was in Mexico?
I'm sorry?
How close was that cow that they talked about in Mexico that had screwworm?
Again, I think that the active infestations are primarily in southern Mexico, but cattle continue to be shipped around the country. And so the one that I heard of that's closest was 70 miles from the Texas border. But again, that was one that was found infested with maggots, but there were no adult screwworm flies found. Nevertheless, they attacked the problem to be preventative, to be proactive. They continued to make sure that there were no further emergences there of the screwworm. Yes, that's my understanding. Anyway, I'm an entomologist, so I don't keep up with the political and logistical situations all that well. But thanks. I'll hang around if anybody wants to talk, but I think the rest of you have served your purpose here at this meeting, and thanks so much for your hospitality.
Thank you, Dr. Hinkle.